Welcome to you all, and delighted that you could join me in conversation, a very informal conversation this morning in relation to how University of Stirling academics and professional services are helping engage with industry. We've got a series and an informal question and answers lined up. So I think I'll start by asking you all to briefly introduce yourself and perhaps say a few words about your research and the department. So Lewis, because you're next on my screen, maybe I'll start with you. So welcome, Lewis.
All right, hi, thank you. So I'm Lewis Macgregor. I'm a lecturer in the Faculty of Health Science and Sport, and specifically I work in sports science side of the department. So our research really focuses as a department on health and sport and physical activity at a population level, but also within quite specific groups. So looking at elite athletes right down to clinical and infirm populations. On a personal level, my own research focuses on neuromuscular control, neuromuscular physiology. And again, there's two real distinct groups that I tend to work with, which are elite athletes in competition, preparation, performance, but also more at-risk groups, if you like, particularly older adults and aging populations. And what I like to try and bring that's quite novel in terms of the research is applying a lot of what we do with elite athletes to try and help benefit the health of the more at-risk populations, such as older adults, as I mentioned.
Great, thank you for that. And Sandy, a brief introduction from you.
Sure. So my research is in optimization and machine learning with little bits of what we call explainability. So it's basically all about helping people make decisions using AI-driven methods. And that's been applied to things like making buildings more energy efficient or transportation networks work more effectively, right through to medical applications where we're trying to choose which drugs are being given to a person in order to achieve the best effect.
Great. And you're joined by your colleague, Jason.
Hi, my name's Jason, and I'm also in computer science and mathematics. My specialization is also in optimization and machine learning, but it's more on the healthcare side. So we work with companies in Sweden and in Iceland for vocational rehabilitation, where we use AI to predict what the likely outcome is for someone's rehabilitation, and then schedule a customized schedule for each individual person to try and guarantee or get as close to possible to guaranteeing that they've got a positive outcome.
Thank you. And Lisa, you're very welcome to join our conversation.
Thanks, Siobhan. My name is Lisa Farrell. I'm the Business Development Officer for the university. So I work across the board and I'm the point of contact for Interface. So I work with colleagues just on the translation piece, translating their research into real world applications, and then the other way around, going out, speaking with businesses, understanding challenges and feeding that back into the university.
And finally, Angus, welcome to our conversation.
My name is Angus Hunter. I'm Associate Dean for Research in the Faculty of Health Sciences and Sport. I have a very similar-ish research breadth as Lewis has described. In terms of my engagement with industry, I've been working with industry on various research projects, and some of these are through pharma, others are through the sports industry, nutrition companies as well. So I've got reasonable insight into a number of the schemes and how the innovation voucher system links to this. And I suppose in my sort of more senior leadership role, I'm very keen to promote the Interface voucher scheme to our early career researchers in the faculty to sort of show them the opportunities and the pathways of what it can do. And sometimes I think there's very much an emphasis throughout the university sector that everything's on the main sort of UKRI type bids. and it's creating this awareness that, particularly post-COVID, I think there's going to be far more emphasis on building the economy and engagement with business. So, yeah, I'm very keen to sort of promote this to enable more of it to happen.
Thanks very much to you all. And I think you've touched on many of the topics that we're going to delve in a little bit more detail with over the coming few minutes. So maybe a kind of question to you, and touching on some of the points that Angus has raised, how can your research be applied to support? And there's a variety of end users, industry, society, communities. So any thoughts from that? Maybe Lewis, you've kind of talked about elite athletes and the kind of jump then to actually kind of how that helps our health. So how can your research be applied?
Yeah, so as you said, and as I touched on, underlying everything that I try to do is about improving people's health and improving their physical fitness, be that for sporting performance or be it for everyday life and quality of life, quality of living. So yeah, certainly engaging with communities and societies and raising awareness is a big part of that. So trying to link with end users, I suppose, early on in the process, and not, to use the cliche, not live in the ivory tower of the researchers and be doing the research that we think is going to benefit the end users, but actually engaging with, well, what do people need, and understanding the needs of communities and societies. From an industry point of view as well, there's a lot of big business involved in sporting performance. To take just one branch of my research at the moment, huge industry in terms of performance aids and sporting equipment, and again tying in early on with these kind of partners to again understand their needs and understand what they need to understand and what research needs to go into their products, I suppose, and into their development. Is certainly a big part of how my research can be applied with different industry partners as well as society and population level.
Thanks, Lewis. And you've got quite a range of end users then, from communities to industry. And Sandy and Jason, I know you work closely together. Are mainly your end users individual companies, or can you see a spill over to other populations, other groups as well?
Well, a lot of the time it tends to be that we work with one company, but things will spill over into a product. So it ends up being something that does touch on a lot of other people. So, one company I've worked with on a large scale is an airline. So they've got hundreds of thousands of passengers, and that's fantastic. So in theory, I can see bits of my work kind of reaching out and somehow connecting with a lot of people. But right at the other end of the scale, a lot of the time we work with very small businesses where it's one or two people. We make something a bit more effective or a bit more efficient within their business, and that's really meaningful to them. And that's probably about as far as it goes, but it's still worthwhile.
And Jason, that probably gives a good breadth of the types of companies that you're working with. So your research must cover or have applicability in lots of different sectors.
Absolutely. So any business decision we ever make is always going to be dependent on a small amount of uncertainty. If we can create a model to remove some of that uncertainty of the future, we can help a business understand what they're going to do going forward. Going beyond that, when we get those models to the point that they're useful and good, we can also tweak a little bit going in and allow us to do prescriptive analytics, which means that we can allow the companies to explore different ways of moving their company forward without actually having to go and invest in it and potentially lose money or alienate customers. Or when it comes to, say, the rehabilitation work we've been doing with rehabilitation centres in the Nordic countries, we could potentially harm people's lives if we make mistakes with these things.
Very insightful indeed. So Lisa, there's no doubting the passion across the academic researchers on the call this morning with respect to wanting to see their knowledge made useful. And so, are there standard approaches across the university that have been adopted to help, turn the passion into actual knowledge and impact? And from your perspective, how do you almost make those connections happen?
Yeah, certainly. I would say there's no hard and fast rules for the way we approach this. Personally, my approach is one of dialogue. So when interacting with external colleagues, as a few of my colleagues here have already touched on, it's a conversation, it's in two directions. So I can wax lyrical about the research across the university, but at the same time, I always want to learn about the challenges in industry and feed that back to my colleagues who are always interested to hear about it, because obviously, that passion, they want to make their research applicable in the real world. So of course they want to know through me what the challenges are, and that that will help to shape their work going forward. Then so myself and colleagues such as Angus, Lewis, Sandy and Jason actively communicate our experiences with other colleagues, and that propagates the culture internally, and we ensure that our early career researchers are part of that conversation.
Absolutely. So communication is part of the key ingredient. And, it's quite daunting for a business perhaps to even consider working with a university. It might be seen that there's lots of high walls around it, or they talk a different language, etc. So what do you think, Lisa, is the hardest thing for a business or a community group when they start that journey to consider when they're collaborating with the university?
Yeah, certainly. As you said, there's numerous factors, but I think especially at this time, post-COVID, when hopefully transitioning into a net zero world, we are finding that businesses we speak to are increasingly time poor. So the challenge that they have is they know they have a challenge, they know they need a solution, but the R&D funding and finance landscape can be a bit bewildering. Add that to the things you've mentioned, Siobhan, the perception that universities might be slow-moving beasts. We do encounter some preconceptions. However, at Stirling, we are a relatively small university, and that does make us that little bit more flexible. So we also work closely with our funding partners and with support agencies. Obviously, we have great links with Interface, and that just smooths the running of collaborations. So I think that always helps the businesses if they know that, we can be flexible to their needs, we can move quickly when we need to, and we are already in contact with the funding and the funding support agencies.
Perfect. Angus, you mentioned Scottish Funding Council innovation vouchers as being a key starting point. And how do you feel that researchers can get the most out of that first collaboration?
Well, it gives them the opportunity to sort of really get a relatively small scale study going. The hope would be that they could get a publication arising from that. But importantly, it's about that researcher developing a relationship with the industry partner, which then will hopefully develop into something a bit bigger. Sometimes, from my experience, companies are attracted to it because they're literally they're starting out, they just do not have much money. So for them to put their in-kind time in, we get, say, £5,000 to get a small study, it's ideal for them. Others, it might be more of a case of they don't want to risk much at the moment in time. So what they're trying to do is sort of test the water a little bit with the university to see, right, well, how is this going to work? Let's just see it. And then if then that, we prove to be productive, we produce the sort of results they're wanting to. I'm not saying the data they want, because it doesn't often necessarily go the way they want, but then that enables them to get on to the next step. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And I think turning to Sandy, in terms of the kind of this, perhaps an innovation vouchers or other small scale program is seen as a starting point. How do you move that to a more longer term relationship?
It's you do have to accept that the thing is a bit of a journey, and I think as Angus was saying, sometimes these things don't work out exactly the way that you wanted them to. So, the proof of concept didn't quite produce the results that you wanted, or that fancy technique that the academic wanted to try actually turned out that was either massively overkill or it was just it wasn't going to work. So you need to be very clear about all the expectations at the beginning, that actually you're wanting to set you wanting to try and build up a longer term relationship with the company, and you ideally want to start out with a little tangible thing that you can do with them, that almost certainly will produce some worthwhile results. And working together on that, you kind of build up the relationship, and at the end of it, you better understand the company, they'll better understand you, and having been honest right from the beginning, it's quite natural that then follows into something else. I think probably of all the innovation vouchers I've had, which have been a few now, more than half of them have led to longer term collaboration with the company of some sort.
Well, that's really encouraging to hear. And I think some of the golden threads I'm hearing from you is managing expectations, but
Yes.
also building that kind of trust almost from the outset, that everybody knows what they're getting involved in. But I do like the fact that not all of them will be perhaps give the results that were anticipated. But looking at the kind of standout partnerships, Lewis, do you have any that perhaps kind of you can bring to mind that might be considered as a kind of standout partnership from what you've supported?
So I'm still very much in the early stages of my research career. So yeah, I'm really, the partnership I'm involved in at the moment is the first of this kind, using an innovation voucher. And yeah, even the stage of the project is still very early doors. But it's been a great experience. And working with a very small company, in their very early stages. So I suppose there's a symmetry there in terms of my research career and their business career. But yeah, I think just kind of building maybe what Angus touched on about building that relationship and that trust. That's been the key for me, is really building up a good, not just a working relationship, but actually a social relationship. So there is that element of trust there, and working with somebody that you want to work with, not just to get from A to B, but actually to enjoy the process and the whole experience. So yeah, that's really the only example I can share, and without going into too much detail on the company name or anything like that.
Perfect. And Jason, I think you've probably had a range of engagements, not just innovation vouchers, but a range of different ways of working with industry. So what for you might be a standout example?
I think one that immediately springs to mind is probably the first innovation voucher I worked on. It was such a nice experience where we got to speak to a company that we live in, as I think Lewis said at one stage, our ivory tower of academia, where everyone around us knows all of our tools. We just take it for granted. But we went to speak to a company who needed not to predict something, but just to understand all the possible routes that they could take to get to their end goal. But there's so many different factors that you can't visualize this, you can't draw it up on a screen. So we use some visualization tools, some from the 1960s, some from the 2020s, and just being able to show a company this, it was like magic, and it reignited an excitement from our perspective as well, because we start to take for granted all these different tools that we use. We start to take for granted what we do, and when it starts to become monotonous, showing it to someone new can be a really rewarding experience, not just for them, but for us as well. So for me, that's probably the one that pops out.
I loved the words you used there in terms of magic. So, it is fantastic when you can open up that box of knowledge, I guess, that you have and processes, etc., and make magic happen. And Lisa, you're a secret ingredient in that, making that magic happen as well, because I guess you have to be there making sure that all the mechanisms are in place for agreements and enabling a smooth engagement. So perhaps you could describe some of the, I suppose, lessons that you've seen, what works well in these circumstances.
Yeah, certainly. In fact, just talking about their secret ingredient, it's my work with interface as well, I think is crucial in this. So even the example that Jason has used there, in that particular one, that stemmed from an interface inquiry came through from me. So there was a bit of back and forward between me and the interface advisor about where would be the best fit. I think this one was originally destined for some finance colleagues. Having worked before, and particularly in a company that used optimization, I immediately thought of Sandy and Jason. So it's back and forward, the behind the scenes that makes this happen as well. And just as Sandy mentioned, Jason mentioned all the different possibilities. The different possibilities with each of these inquiries that come through. So it's important that we have strong relationships with interface, and we can have that back and forward conversation to understand the industrial needs as well as the capabilities within the university and where that collaboration best fits.
Great. And I think a number of you have touched on the importance of knowledge exchange and working with industry and getting your research delivering impact, particularly for your career development. And Lewis, maybe we'll explore with you, what advice do you have for other early stage career researchers as they embark on perhaps a journey to engage with end users?
Yeah, so I think one of the things probably that I've learned through the innovation voucher process is to really put that impact, if you like, that end user end goal right at the very start of the process. Sometimes that develops out of a nice research idea and then the impact follows. So actually, really, the more successful route is always going to be if the impact or the path to impact is first. And so that's something that's definitely I learned through this process, and that's important, and that would be some advice. I think probably the key advice, you referred to Lisa as the sort of secret weapon, and so I think engaging with in the case of Stirling, it would be Lisa and research and innovation team, for whatever institution that early career researchers are working at. There'll be an equivalent. There'll be a Lisa there. So engage with, engage and reach out and make yourself known and make yourself available. The example Lisa gave there, that when an inquiry came in, straight away knew that Sandy and Jason were the ones to go to. So again, for early career researchers, making sure that your profile is in the public domain, I suppose, and try to make sure that you're in the right room for these opportunities to happen. I think we always hear a lot about the kind of the serendipity and the chance that collaborations form out of. And yeah, you really need to be in the right place for those lucky chances to happen. So that's really all I could say in terms of advice for other early career researchers.
That's hugely helpful. And Jason, I suppose you've used or you've been involved in multiple different collaborations. So how have they helped advance your career?
Honestly, I think it's pretty much instrumental in my first lectureship position. They kept me employed through a lot of my postdoc, back and forth through multiple different things. But I got to sample so many different fields and so many different collaborations that it wouldn't be physically possible under any other circumstance. If I went to industry, I couldn't jump from company to company every 2 months and get all these different kinds of experience. So it's allowed me to not only gain experience across industry, but it's allowed me to specialize in data science itself, which allowed me then to apply for a lectureship in data science. And I now teach data science as my day-to-day teaching, and I use some of the innovation voucher-based examples in that teaching itself. And because I've been interacting with industry so much, it's now my admin role at Stirling as well. So I'm now responsible for developing those kind of conversations with industry and different companies. And ironically enough, one of the first things that we talk about is the likes of innovation vouchers to try and spin up those initial conversations. And as soon as you can walk in to speak to a company and say that I can potentially get a piece of research done for you and all you have to do is invest a little bit of your time, then companies become very amenable. And sometimes it's all it takes is that to break down the initial barrier. And you don't need to follow, like it doesn't necessarily need to be followed through with. It doesn't need to happen. It just means that the company becomes more open to those collaborations from the very outset, knowing that it's actually low risk for the company itself.
It's a great kind of to hear, I guess, those breaking down the barriers, but also that rich variety of end users that you've got been able to work with. And Sandy, from your perspective, is there more that can be done to help, early stage career researchers or postdocs to engage with end users? They might think, oh, is this a good use of my time? I should be focused on publications. So what do you advise might you offer?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is really not to be afraid of giving it a go, because from the academic side, it's relatively low risk as well, and it can be a bit intimidating because, as we've talked about quite a bit, it's thinking outside the box. It's definitely coming out of the academic language and the normal kind of ways that we do things to try and reach out to business. But it's a really rewarding and worthwhile thing to do. So don't be afraid to give it a go. I think certainly, I don't know whether this is something that Interface could do or whether it's better being done within individual institutions, but hook up with other people who have had innovation vouchers before. So you don't have to go in alone. This can be a collaborative thing. So ideally find another academic who's had a successful industrial connection before and work with them on response and on building the relationship. And once you've done it once, it's much simpler to do it the second time. And look out for other examples of partnerships, other success stories. Try to understand kind of how they've worked out, and try to follow their example. There isn't really one single way of doing an industrial connection. There's as many ways as there are companies, I guess, but it's worth trying to take some kind of inspiration from what's gone before, because we've all anyone who's had these connections has worked through all of the language barriers and things already. So yeah, I guess that's the short version is hook up with someone who's done it before.
Absolutely, that's really sound advice. And Angus, from your more departmental perspective, encouraging early stage career researchers to consider next stages in their research. Do you think, where would you rank on the scale within your department, and are there more that could be done?
Yeah, definitely, I think so. Because I think for any early career researcher, getting on the ladder of obtaining research funding is really hard, really hard. You can't just straight out of a postdoc. It's to go and get 300,000 on the UKRI is very difficult. It's not impossible, but this enables them just to get those initial steps, get the data, get the publications, develop the relationships. The other important thing, in relating back to the UKRI, there's so much more emphasis now on impact. And I review quite a lot for Medical Research Council. And to actually up front have demonstration that you've got engagement with industrial partners really adds so much value. You can write the best research grant, but if you haven't actually engaged or shown evidence of project partners, then the chances are it won't get funded. So even through you've got this sort of an industry route and all the funding associated to that, but it does actually also help through the other more traditional UKRI type route as well, because the emphasis on impact is getting bigger, not smaller.
That's really insightful, Angus, particularly as you appraise some of the applications. And I suppose even engaging with small businesses could give a level of impact.
Absolutely. And you talk about, Lewis mentioned communities. You've got communities sort of local, national, global, and your starting point is local. So if you've got this engagement through industry that's engaged with the community, then that's your best model to start. And then it just sort of broadens out from there.
So we're sadly coming to nearly the end of our conversation, and it's been great to cover so many different topics. But I think it would be really great to hear perhaps some final comments from you all. And you have a choice. You can offer a top tip to actually, building a successful partnership, and what do you think is the top tips? Or you can just offer perhaps another example of what you think is working well and what can be built on. So in no particular order, Lisa, maybe from your perspective, what's the top tip that you might consider for building long-term successful partnerships?
Yeah, I think for me, we've touched on numerous elements here, but something maybe we haven't touched on is maybe interdisciplinarity and lateral thinking. So when an inquiry comes in, questioning, is this the right department for it? Could this be two departments joining up? Could we get an early career researcher from a different department joining this collaboration? So it's just using, different techniques and different fields of study on the one challenge, I think has been something that's been quite interesting for me over the last few years.
Absolutely. And, you never know what'll happen having brought two different departments into this conversation.
Absolutely.
We'll have great connections happening. And Sandy, from your perspective, any final words of thoughts, examples?
Sure. So I really want to emphasize how worthwhile working with organizations outside of academia is. It can feel like it's a bit of a distraction because it's applied stuff and it clearly can't be as challenging, or I can't get publications from it, and those things aren't true. Working on real world applied problems in a setting that's external to the university typically will introduce you to really interesting kind of niggles or challenges that you just don't get from synthetic academic problems and scenarios. So it is really worthwhile, even from a pure research point of view, to engage with people outside the university. So give it a try.
And Lewis?
I suppose just my final point would be that the innovation voucher and the process really gave me a lot of confidence as a researcher to feel like I could actually step out and lead on some projects, this kind of got me started, I suppose, in terms of being the first project that I've been really taking a bit of a lead on that's actually been successfully funded. So that's a boost, obviously, from a career perspective, but actually just the confidence of going through the process and engaging with different partners. And sometimes networking can be a sort of horrible thing to have to try and do, and go and approach people you don't know and speak to them. And really just the process, whether the projects turns out to be successful or not, by whatever metric you want to judge it, it's been a success for me in terms of career development and in terms of what I've learned and what I've taken from it, from a confidence point of view moving forward.
That's great to hear. And Jason?
I think I'd like to say, don't be afraid to show some excitement for your work. Any company that we have dealt with that has interacted with Interface and has came through this process are really motivated people. And as soon as you can kind of show that you understand their business, their world, and then let some of your excitement flare up and they get excited too, and it generates a really nice synergy between academia and industry, where both sides get really excited about what we do. We end up developing really nice connections. And in at least 2 cases at this very moment, we actually discovered that they had other data sets that are purely from an academic perspective, but they've seen how excited we are about what we want to do and what we want to build. And they're allowing us to use their data sets to do very academic endeavors. And I'm actually going from co-I in both those projects to PI in both the other 2 projects that are purely academic, and they will result in some very good publications, to be honest. But it's because we interacted, because we networked, because we were excited about those networks to start with, that the rest of the career has kind of set itself up. It's started to build itself.
Great. And Angus, final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I suppose it's just, for me, a lot of the message, certainly for early career researchers, is with this process, engaging with industry, I kind of think it's a bit like catching a fish. You get initial nibble, but you've got to sort of carefully wind it in, bring the net. You might lose it, but you can then get it and bring it in. Whereas, as I say, going in cold for a bid, you're talking about success rates of less than 25%. And that's what, and I'd say I've had both. And, you know, for the normal research bids, you can spend 3 or 4 months of every waking life on this bid. And yeah, you've got a fairly small chance of getting it. But what I like about engagement in the industry is to say, once you get that initial engagement, you start to reel them in like the fish, then it can be a lot more rewarding than just having that straight disappointment of spending all this work and you get rejected for it. So I suppose that's the thing I'd like to put out, that would hopefully encourage researchers to look at, you know, explore this route.
I think that's a fantastic analogy, Angus. I think we might take that forward in terms of, yes, reeling in fish and making successful magic happen, I think, as well as what we've also heard this morning. So thank you all so much. It's been a brilliant conversation. I think we could have sat and chatted for much longer, but sadly our time has come to an end. So thank you all so much for sharing your insights, your thoughts, your honesty, and also I'm delighted to hear how, you know, from small little acorns, many long-term partnerships are growing. So I wish you all the best in your future careers and also in your future endeavours in engaging with industry communities and other end users, and particularly I think in how they are providing the platform to be able to draw in much greater research funding as well to enable your departments and careers to flourish. So thank you all.